All right, welcome to this interview for the Diversity Virtual Resource Center for LGBTQ plus students. My name is Aaron Tam. I'm currently a fourth year philosophy major. I work for the Study Abroad office as a Global Titan ambassador, and today I'm here to interview Gerard. Gerard, can you please introduce yourself real quick with your year, major, pronouns?
Hi, my name is Gerard Avelino. I'm a second year grad student um, here at Rutgers University. Uh, I'm doing my grad studies on linguistics. Um, yeah, my pronouns, I have no pronoun preference. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it, I guess.
Cool. And so you said you study abroad, right? Can you like talk about the program you went on real quick?
Yeah, I studied abroad in Paris for the last year of my undergrad. Um, it was with a program called MICEFA, which is basically an exchange program between universities in the Paris area and universities here in North America. So Cal State Fullerton is one of those universities that has a partnership with MICEFA, and we've been sending a few students there, and they've been sending some students over to Cal State Fullerton, and yeah, I think it's a great program.
Great, nice. So, I mean, what were your initial impressions when you got to France?
Um, I think for me, I had already gone to France a couple of times beforehand, but only as a tourist.
Mhm.
Just to see the city, just to go of Paris, and just to go around and do the usual touristy things. But when you go to a new country to actually live there, you actually notice a lot of things that are very different. Because when you're a tourist, you just see, the regular sites. You don't really get to see what it is to be somebody who lives somewhere full time. And Paris is a great city. It has a lot of culture, a lot of great food, a lot of um, really interesting things to see. But I think one of the best things about living in a big European city like Paris is that there's some really good public transport. You can
Mhm.
get anywhere you want really quickly and conveniently, and that's not something that we can, relate to easily, being in such a car-centric culture like
Mhm. Mhm.
in Southern California,
Mhm.
especially. So that was one of the big things that I really enjoyed. What else? It's just that I feel like it's just more livable. It's very easy to get around. For example, health insurance isn't a big isn't the problem there. Like, you're basically taken care of.
Uh-huh.
Um, there's always there's this really like busy vibe going on, and you can do it, and it just feels like you could do whatever you want in there. And yeah, I enjoyed that level of freedom, being on my own in this new environment, this new city, discovering all these new things. So yeah,
Mhm.
it was great.
Yeah. I didn't tell you earlier, but I did study abroad in Taiwan during my second year, and I definitely agree with the transportation part and just the health
Yeah.
insurance. Yeah, it's just yeah. Honestly, like when I was in Taiwan, I did not step into a car for like half a year, kind of thing. So
Yep.
like I just took the bus and like the public transportation and like the healthcare there is really cheap as well, just like in France, right?
Yeah,
Subsidized healthcare. Uh-huh.
absolutely.
Uh-huh.
It was
So.
just so much more convenient in a lot of ways. Yeah,
Mhm.
'cause I don't drive, and
Mhm.
that's something that is very difficult, especially living in Southern
Oh yeah.
California.
Uh-huh.
I live in New Jersey right now, and it's pretty much the same thing. We do have a
Uh-huh.
train, but that's more long distance stuff. And
Uh-huh.
just I think the biggest thing about you know having the freedom to do things is just having the freedom to move around freely,
Right.
and that's something that I think we take for granted in the United States, especially if you don't have a car, or
Right.
if you're trying to reduce your carbon footprint. All these things come into play with that.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Okay, let's move on to the next question then. So what inspired you to study abroad and what motivated you to go apply?
So when I was at Cal State Fullerton, I double majored in linguistics and French. So, I thought the best thing that I could do to help, you know, increase my knowledge of France, its culture, its language, all that kind of stuff, is to actually go and move to France, and see for myself what's going on over there. So that's the biggest reason that I wanted to go study abroad in France. Learn the language where it's actually spoken, get to learn this new culture while living there because it's completely different. All the things that you learn in class, all the stuff that you see in your presentations and those movies, all of those are just things that um, they're just representations of the actual real place, the actual real culture. So I had to go. I definitely had to go. Um, so that was one of the big motivations. Another one is that Paris is um, it's a really good hub for traveling elsewhere in Europe. And I definitely took advantage of that. I got to visit a lot of cool places because I lived in Paris and there's great transportation there.
Right.
Um, so yeah, those are my two major things, like go to Paris, learn French, learn the culture firsthand, and
Mhm.
also use that as a starting point to branch out in my own like personal,
Mhm.
travels.
Mhm. I'm just curious, how good has your French become ever since going through the program?
Um, I always find it difficult to rate myself.
Oh.
Um, I was able to go and attend classes, like upper level classes, even a couple of graduate
Wow.
classes in French.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I mean, it was difficult to 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 make friends, particularly with people with the youth who speak French, especially because the way that younger people speak is very different from the way that you're taught the language formally in class. So that
Mhm.
was one of the big hurdles. But even if that was the case, I think I was able to successfully manage French in an academic setting.
Mhm.
Um, so I think I'm on a good level with that. Yeah. So
Mhm.
I got to go to classes. I also did my internship with MICEFA with the exchange
Mhm.
program, and that included a lot of interaction with, you know, with the French bureaucratic system. I had to go to the post
Right.
office, send things. I had
Uh-huh.
to go to the bank and do deposits.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of practical things I got to practice too. So yeah, I think my French, I whenever I put in my resume, for example, I say I speak French on a professional level.
Wow.
Um, and
Uh-huh.
yeah, so I can get by. I could definitely go,
Mhm.
live in a francophone country for a longer
Wow.
period of time. I wish I had like the opportunity to actually take a proficiency exam and get like a level and say, okay, you're
Right.
this level of French, and
Uh-huh.
that way I could, actually put something more concrete on my resume or something. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, I think I can get by. Like I do the French version of Wordle,
Uh-huh.
and so far it's going just as well as the English one, which
Nice.
is to say,
Nice.
it's fine. So
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's going
Definitely,
well.
definitely more confident, right? After going through the program.
Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. And it's kind of
Mhm.
strange because I haven't taken yeah, it's been a few years since I came back home from France. It's been
Uh-huh.
a while since I've taken an actual class in French. But the longer as the more time goes by, I still retain a lot of those um a lot of the language precisely I think because I lived in it for a while and basically absorbed it.
Right.
So yeah, when I can watch French news, I can go to Netflix and watch French things there.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I think
Mhm.
yeah, moving to France, living there for a while definitely helped a lot. It was probably a top thing that helped me get to a level of French that I could use in real life.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Impressive. All right. Okay, let's move on to the next question now. So this is going to be more probing towards like your identity. So how do you
Mhm.
identify and how often do you think about your identity and how it relates to your daily life?
So I identify as a gay man.
Mhm,
Um, I definitely could use the word queer to identify myself. And yeah, it definitely affects my daily life
mhm,
because it's just a core part of who I am. It's, one of the aspects of me that it's not something that I could just not, live with.
mhm,
Uh, for one, I'm married to a man, and that's kind of one of the and having to go through a lot of the process of getting married, the process of you know adding him to my health insurance, the process
mhm,
of getting all these legal things to get processed. I think there are some interesting challenges that I don't think I would have realized were kind of a bit more difficult because I'm gay. For example, when I went to update my health insurance, I said, "Oh, I would like to add my spouse to my insurance," and the person um, immediately assumed that I had a wife, when that's not the case. I have a husband.
mhm,
And going to the DMV, for example, and getting my New Jersey ID, we got ours together, and it was a hassle because they got his gender marker wrong on the ID, which was kind of bizarre to me. That there's always these tiny little things that you don't expect to happen um, I guess a regular heterosexual relationship.
mhm.
So there's a lot of things that go into the identity of being LGBTQ that um, some people might take for granted, and I think it really just has to do with with exposure, with recognition, with visibility, that all these things kind of will just fade away eventually.
Mhm.
And it's not to say that it's all just negative stuff. There's a lot of really good stuff that comes with it too. Being LGBTQ means that you have basically a built-in community of people who can relate to you and your experiences. Um, it kind of makes you aware that there's a lot of diversity in the world that you can't deny when it comes to you know all these different aspects of life. Um, so yeah, it's not something that I can ignore. It's not something that I should take for granted, and it's not something that other people should ignore and take for granted either. It's a core part of me. It's a core part of a lot of people, and yeah, and it's important.
Right, definitely. And how would your experiences here contrast like when you were in France? What kind of like differences were there while you were there in France compared to the US?
Um, I wouldn't say there are that many differences in
Mhm,
life here compared to life in France when it came to um, LGBTQ identity stuff.
mhm,
I do think California, especially Southern California, the more urban parts, around around Fullerton, I
mhm,
think um, it might feel more accepting in California than it does in France. I don't know, but not there's not that big of a difference. I think you'll find the exact same. Especially because in Paris you have a Disneyland, in Southern California you have a Disneyland, and I mean, lots of LGBTQ people love Disneyland, and honestly, it's a big part of LGBTQ identity in Southern California.
uh-huh,
And it's the same in Paris. Like, it's
uh-huh,
interesting how many parallels there are. But yeah, but in day-to-day life, I very minor differences. The culture is just it's just different, I guess. I mean, something like American culture is generally more, um, it's generally more, um, it's definitely more mixed, more diverse than, for example, French culture, just because of the nature of American culture being such a melting pot, or a cultural mosaic. Whereas France, they also have their own diversity over there, but it's different. It's hard. It's really hard to put into words what those differences are. Um, but yeah, I didn't feel like there was anything major that I had to manage when it came to that kind of stuff.
Right. You see. Yeah. So I want to ask you, like, what is the attitude of like, France towards, right? You talk about how like it's not too much of a difference, um, but were there any things that were that just stood out to you in those differences? And also, just want to ask, like, how did your identity impact your choice of state abroad location?
Um, there wasn't anything I noticed much different, I guess. It's just France really likes their traditions, but at the same time, the younger people in France like um, kind of having that having their new identities, new ideas, kind of, but still rooting it in those traditions. So, and one of those traditions that France has that I think that America could use a bit more of is that French people really enjoy their activism and their revolutions and their freedom fighting.
Mhm,
For example, when I was at the university that I was in Paris, they regularly have student strikes because they ask for better treatment for immigrant students. They ask for lower fees, and their fees and tuition it's already so much lower than ours, and yet they still kind of fight to make sure that they have better treatment. I
mhm,
mean, that's something that I think is super interesting, a really super interesting difference that we have, comparing university life in France to university life in Cal State Fullerton, is that
mhm,
um, what they do is so much more disruptive, and that's exactly the point. You want to disrupt, you want to make noise
mhm.
to make sure your voice is heard, and that's not something that we've seen in universities at Cal State Fullerton in a really long time, I think.
Right.
Um, so that's one of the interesting things that I thought was um, was kind of a shock to me, I guess.
Mhm,
But as to your question of like whether this kind of stuff, whether um, the cultural difference affected my choice of study abroad destination, I think definitely that um, the culture had a big impact. I mean, I could have gone to another country if I wanted to learn French.
mhm,
France isn't the only country where you learn French. You can go to um, lots of countries in West Africa speak
mhm,
French. I mean, you can go to Quebec to get French education,
mhm.
but I didn't choose Canada mostly because it's not far away enough. And um, but I chose France over um, countries in West Africa, for instance, because a lot of countries in West Africa are not as accepting of LGBTQ identities as they do in Europe, and that there's a long list of reasons why that is the case. And while I would like, to visit Africa one day, it's just not something that I would feel safe going to as an openly gay person. If I were
Mhm,
to go to countries in Europe where they do have um, laws enshrined to protect, for example, to protect me from discrimination. These are things that don't exist in a lot of countries outside of the Western world. And again, there are many reasons for this. Most specifically, these are relics of colonial laws, and even if those colonial powers have eventually, moved to a place where they can, you know, have more progressive laws on the board, they kind of just abandoned their, their abandoned the places where they, that they colonized to their own, and now there's this big divide of, the global north versus the global south, and it's such a complicated situation, and I regret the fact that this affects where an LGBTQ person would think of going for study abroad. But there's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of progress to be done. I mean, I know for myself, I'm originally from the Philippines, another one of those countries that were from the global south that had been colonized and then abandoned. And LGBTQ rights are just different. They're when you have people who are struggling for basic needs, you can't really expect them to have as much of a desire for other kinds of rights beyond those needs. If they're still struggling to put food on their table, it's still going to be a long way to thinking about, hey, I want to have the right to marry somebody of the same sex as me. So yeah, it's a complicated situation. Again, there's a lot of things I regret about the situation, but it's not something that will change immediately in the near future. And one day hopefully it will, but for now, these are things that LGBTQ people have to consider before they travel, before they move somewhere, before they study abroad.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, I'm just thinking that the effects of colonialism has kind of for like people who want that like LGBTQ people who want to go to the global south to study abroad, but then they have to consider that that these countries they haven't explored and developed those laws or movements just because colonialism and its impact kind of made them disenfranchised in some extent.
Absolutely.
It's it's definitely a lot to consider, and maybe it might be kind of ironic that like the West in the end kind of has the privilege to go through and think about these like LGBTQ rights and kind of advocate for them. It's definitely a lot to consider and very complex.
Absolutely, and it's incredibly ironic because in a lot of places, in a lot of indigenous cultures, the ideas of gender and sexuality are completely different from what we are used to in a Western perspective, and it's because of colonialism that all these different various expressions of gender and sexuality had to be constrained and suppressed. And so yeah, it's incredibly ironic that now, because of colonialism, you don't find as much freedom of expression in many parts of the world. So yeah, it's layers and layers of all this kind of stuff.
And just want to ask like a follow-up question. In France, do you ever feel the need to hide your identity while studying abroad there?
I think so. At some points, yes. Yeah, when I was in France, certain neighborhoods of Paris were a lot more conservative than others. But yeah, specifically homophobic and racist areas that, you know, like when I lived in Paris, I was dating someone, and in of the most of the time, we really couldn't be openly affectionate in public. We couldn't hold hands or anything like that. And I think there like there's still a long way to go when it comes to acceptance, especially even in a big cosmopolitan area like Paris.
Mhm.
So yeah, there as much as we want to say that, oh, the West is progressive, the West has all these ideas that we have to be protected for our identities, it's still not fully the case,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, there definitely were times where I couldn't be, you know, I couldn't be open about my identity.
Mhm.
I mean,
Right.
being part of the LGBTQ community means that you constantly are in the process of coming out, no matter where you are or who you're with. It's just like you have to weigh whether you want to be open about your identity versus whether you want to, literally be safe where you are. So yeah, there are definitely times where I didn't feel all that safe about being open.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the next question. So next question is, were there any LGBTQ plus organizations and resources that you utilized while studying abroad? And were those resources easily accessible and helpful?
Um, I don't think there were any in particular that I used while I was there, but there are
Mhm.
definitely many ones that are available.
Mhm.
So the universities there, they definitely have their own um, LGBTQ, not necessarily resource centers like what we have at Cal State Fullerton, where there's a specific office that supports um, people of
Mhm.
color, LGBTQ students, all these
Mhm.
different identities. That's
Mhm.
not something that you would find necessarily in a university in Paris, but there's definitely a lot of student-run organizations are um, that are specific for LGBTQ people.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I definitely. It was more of a time thing for me. I had a lot of things to
Oh,
do on my own,
mhm.
like
Right.
academics,
Mhm.
doing my own travel stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's definitely a lot of resources there, and I think it's also very common for LGBTQ students to go study abroad, especially in Europe. Um, and so not only will you find organizations at your university run by students, but you'll also find that a lot of the people who are going along on the program with you are also part of the LGBTQ community. So I made a lot of
Mhm.
friends there from my program who were from America who were also LGBTQ plus.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's a lot of ways to get support when you need it.
Mhm.
It's I mean not just because people who study abroad, you'll find a lot of LGBTQ people there, and it's not just Americans who came with me in my program, but other study abroad students from other countries who went to Paris. A lot of them were also LGBTQ. So there's just basically, again, like I said earlier, when you're LGBTQ, that you already kind of have that built-in community of people who you can relate with,
Mhm.
and that's always something that you'll find when you study abroad, when you go traveling.
Yeah, definitely very helpful and supportive there in your specific program. That's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the next question. Next question is, did you ever encounter a situation that you found offensive or uncomfortable, and how did you overcome that?
Hmm. There, hmm. I guess there were a few, but I don't think many of them had to do specifically with being LGBTQ.
Oh,
Some of them have to do specifically with me being not French or me
right.
being
Mhm.
a person of color, me being fat, for example.
Mhm.
Um, like one time when a couple of my study abroad friends and we wanted to take um, a bus from Paris to
Mhm.
the Normandy to go see some of the landing sites from World War II, and there was a big misunderstanding we had with the time to the bus and where we could find the bus, and we only found out very late that we actually missed our bus, even if we were there early. We just saw it leave. So we went to the office, the ticket office, to see if we could get a different bus later in the day. The moment we walk in, we asked, "Hi, we missed our bus. What can we do?" And the woman at the desk was kind of like, she was offended by the fact that we didn't say bonjour first. We didn't say good morning. And I guess that's a big cultural difference that you have to, you have to consider, like, what are these norms that you have to, you have to learn before you can properly interact with somebody from a different culture. So we had to ask her question a couple of times before we realized, oh, we're not saying good morning, and we probably should say that before we continue. And when we actually did say bonjour, she replied bonjour, and then she actually started helping us. So that was one of the things. Another uncomfortable situation was when I was walking around Paris with a friend, and when you're in a big city, there's always people who are trying to scam you out of something. They approach you, they try to like make you buy something off of them, or they try to like force some sort of trinket onto you and then force you to pay. And so this one guy approaches, and he thinks I'm Hispanic, so he starts speaking in Spanish. He says something, and I understood. I immediately knew that he was up to something, and I said, I don't speak Spanish. In Spanish, and then he's like, okay, but do you speak French? He asked in French. I said, no, I don't. And then he asked, do you speak English? I was like, no. And he went through all these languages, and I was like, no. And he was like, what the hell? What do you speak then? And I said in Filipino, in Tagalog, I said, well, I speak Tagalog. What I speak Tagalog. What, like, do you? And he looked shocked. He thought that I was like, it looked like he thought I was like putting a curse on him or doing witchcraft or something, and he literally ran off after I said that. It was really strange, and
Definitely.
I'm glad it worked.
Right.
For
A
one.
good outcome for you, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But one more situation was, again, just walking around Paris. Every now and then somebody would comment in French. I guess because I know I have some Americans with me, and I'm speaking in English, and they would say in French, "Wow, he's so fat." And these are things that I know to ignore, because I don't care, and they might. But if they said something like that to somebody who was more insecure about their body issues, that would definitely be an incredibly hurtful comment, and might affect them more. So it's just those kind of things that you have to learn to ignore and manage when you have this intersection of identities within you. That what are the fights that are worth fighting?
Right.
Not only because you yourself want to be safe with what you're doing, especially being in a new place that you don't know anything, you don't know people, you don't know, you don't completely know the culture. So I have to think, like, is this a situation where I can just say something, flippant or witty and scare somebody off? Or is this a situation where, I just look the other way and keep going? So it's always a balance with these kind of things. Like, do I have to confront, or is it something that I can afford to ignore?
Yeah, I say, like, especially when it comes to traveling in general, just to counter all these kinds of crazy situations, from like, your run-of-the-mill pickpocket to, like, people just being blatantly like racist or very like offensive in front of you, and really definitely studying abroad, I feel like gives you the opportunity to really just out of your comfort zone and really get into those uncomfortable situations
Yeah,
that might even hurt you and just, kind of toughen up, That's how
absolutely,
I think of it.
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. All
Yeah.
right, let's move on to the next question. So how did your identity evolve or not throughout the program? And did you gain any new perspectives on your identity while being abroad?
Um, yeah, I think absolutely it did evolve. I mean, being in a different physical, cultural context affects literally every facet of your identity. You get to figure out, okay, this is how I can act, this is how I can express my identities when I'm in Southern California,
Mhm,
versus this is how I can express it when I'm in Paris, versus, you know, this is how I can do it when I'm at home versus when I'm outside of that, home situation. So there's just definitely a lot of things that you have to consider when you go somewhere new.
mhm,
Um, so it didn't evolve necessarily with um, internally. It was like how I identify or how I felt about my identity, but with how I can manage that identity confronted with different situations. So yeah, it's just kind of having to manage how other people see you, because that's essentially what these identities are. It's not just what how you identify and how you feel, but about how others identify you and how they feel about you. So yeah, it's managing all those different expectations from other people that you have to consider when you go abroad.
mhm. Yeah, definitely. Like you, like each community you encounter or each person you encounter, you do have to really adjust. And I definitely agree with that. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, thank you for the answer. All right, let's move on to the next question. So, what advice would you give to other LGBTQ plus students looking to study abroad?
First of all, I think the biggest piece of advice that I could tell anybody, not just LGBTQ students, but
Mhm,
especially LGBTQ students who want to study abroad, is to just go do it. Just get out of your comfort zone of your home area and see how other people around the world live. Get to those situations where you have to be uncomfortable and have to learn how to manage your own identity, where you have to manage how others see you. Um, that's the biggest thing that you can take away from studying abroad is how does your culture, how does your personal identity interact with the cultures of the people who are around you. So yeah, absolutely, go study abroad, do it
mhm,
100%. Your study abroad advisors are really good at giving you specific advice about the places where you're interested in or for your academics. You will never feel like you are alone when you go studying abroad, because not only you
mhm,
have your advisors, you have other study abroad students, you have this whole community who has your back when you go study abroad. So
mhm,
just go do it.
mhm,
um any specific advice? I would definitely tell them to make friends with other study abroad students, and also with students of the place where you're visiting. um Another piece of advice is, if you have an extended period of time anywhere, to try to expand your travel horizons and not just stick with the city where you're studying abroad, but go to the other cities of that country, go to another country if you can. Take advantage of being in a new place and go see more new places. That's not necessarily something that you could do when you're in the United States, where everything is super far from everything else. And it's hard to get transportation anywhere. But
mhm,
when you're somewhere like Europe or Asia, or in East Asia, like, take advantage of where you are, and yeah, go travel as much as you can. I guess another piece of advice is that if you are thinking about studying abroad, make sure that you do it as early as possible in your undergrad career.
mhm,
Because first of all, you will be younger, and if you are under 25, especially in Europe, you have a lot of opportunities to do free things. because you are a youth and you have your ID that says that you are not just young but a student, and that opens a lot of doors for you. Unfortunately for me, I was 26 when I went to study abroad in Paris, literally just above the cutoff. So a lot
Oh,
of the places where I had to go, like my classmates, they were like,
uh,
what, 23, 24, or even younger, like 19, 20, and they could go anywhere. But sometimes I had to pay, and they could just go in with their IDs. So if you're going to study abroad, do it before you turn 25. Not to say that you shouldn't do it when you're over 25. You'll just have to spend a little more money. um, and one more thing, and speaking of having that money to go study abroad, is apply for scholarships. There are so many scholarships out there, especially scholarships for LGBTQIA students, for students of color, for students who are the first person in your family to go to university, or even to study abroad in general. So go look for those scholarships. The study abroad office will help you find those too. And you usually have to write an essay, and if you're somebody who has a big intersection of identities, you will definitely find some sort of something to make the reviewers relate to your situation and make them want to give you that scholarship money. So yeah, definitely do it. If I didn't get the scholarships that I did get, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed my time as much. I would have had to stress out over money. But yeah, especially because I got the Fund for Education Abroad Rainbow Scholarship. That was a big part of what made my study abroad better. Just
more
not
affordable, less
more
stressful.
affordable. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, no, definitely agree with all the above. Go young. I definitely did it when I was young. I was 19 myself to Taiwan, so
that's nice.
I went
Awesome.
super young, and I definitely agree. Travel a lot. I mean, like from my personal experience, I had to take a lot of classes while I was in my study abroad location just because of the requirements, so I couldn't travel that much, but definitely take advantage of that. And yeah, I definitely agree with all you said, Gerard, especially the
Yeah,
scholarship part.
yeah, for sure. Apply for those. And I
Mhm,
mean, even if you do have a lot of academics to keep in mind,
mhm,
and I mean, that was the case for me too. I had so many classes, especially because the number of units that you have over in a different country might be different from the amount of time that you spend on those units in California. But you'll have a long weekend eventually. You'll have
right,
a spring break. Like
exactly.
take those breaks and
Uh-huh.
use them as much as you can to explore.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And we're coming towards the end of the interview. Is there anything that we have not talked about that you would like to share?
Um, no, not in particular. I think we covered a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think the main thing is just go do it. Just go study abroad and
Just do it.
see what it does to you. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
study abroad is basically it changed my life in many, many ways. Like
Mhm.
it gave me the confidence to, speak a foreign language, and that kind of really helped me a lot in my grad school application. I think the fact that I studied abroad in a language that was relevant to what I was studying. I mean,
Mhm.
French is one of the main languages that linguistic research is published in, so that helped a lot. Um, it helped me, explore other cultures than the one that I was just studying. I was able to go visit um, so many places from studying abroad. Um, and it was because of study abroad that I met my husband. I met him when I went on um, on a show, like after the semester was over. I went to Greece and I met him there. So that's one of the great things about studying abroad, is that you meet people who will change your life.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's
Mhm.
highly recommend. 10 out of 10.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for sharing all this wonderful information with us, Gerard. And to everyone who has sat through this whole interview, thank you so much for sitting through this. And yeah, have a good day, Gerard. Talk to you
Thank
soon.
you. Thank you for having me. So,
Yeah,
yeah, thank you so much. It was an
bye
honor.
bye.